How does neuroticism interact with IQ? We've all been in situations where a reasonable point of view is met by a barrage of irritable insults. Just for in context, in this group, one of our members recently posted about how she went to a therapist and just asked some ideas about evolutionary psychology and was met with a barrage of, lecturing and telling her, that this was not a real science and whatnot. So, so that said, are people whose emotions play such a major role able to reason in an abstract and measured way? Or does high neuroticism knock off the equivalent of 10 or maybe 20 IQ points? Has this ever been studied?
Well, those are a couple of different questions.
Yeah.
Yeah. You want to jump in?
Yeah, well, Jen and I have a mutual friend who has coined a new phrase for this, and he calls it effectively stupid. So, and sometimes it doesn't matter how high somebody's IQ is, if they have horrendous information and they're effectively stupid, and if they're more susceptible to holding on to horrendous information if they've got some haywire personality characteristics. So, for example, I can give you an example of effectively stupid. Imagine a very disagreeable person in a lawsuit, and the right move is to settle because it's just by far the right strategy. But he can't help it. He's just so disagreeable. He's not willing to just settle and walk. So instead, he just continues to throw good money after bad, continuing to pursue a lawsuit just because he's so disagreeable he can't let go. That is effectively stupid. So that's how I look at this situation with this therapist. We could speculate about what sorts of things are disturbing to this lady. There's all kinds of there's something in EP for everybody.
something very disturbing in EP for everybody. That's true. Well, particularly when you're any kind of psychodynamic therapist or anyone outside of the EP world, and your status is being actively threatened by it too. So, this is not just a personality disruption or just any other reason to fight back against it, but there's very potentially an attack on this therapist's place in the greater hierarchy where they perceive themselves. So of course that makes people also more likely to hold on to horrendous information. Bad personality and status defense will both do that.
Yeah, that's actually yeah, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. I'm not going to interrupt the great guru ever.
No great gurus here. Now I've forgotten what I was going to say. Oh, that never happens to a real guru. They never forget. Yeah, go ahead.
I guess I was asking too. I was thinking of in a past episode, I think recently, maybe in the last 10 or so episodes, you mentioned that if someone is not in a good financial position, mm-hmm. that it may knock off 10 IQ points.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And so I suspect this questioner is asking a similar thing, is that mm-hmm. if someone is a particular threshold of instability or neuroticism, can that knock off IQ points in general? Or is it just context dependent?
Yeah. This is what I think Jen and I were trying to say, and maybe it's just a little too obvious for us, so we're not being clear. To the extent that you are emotionally poorly regulated, you are, i.e., neurotic, then, just by definition, we're talking about if you're getting in the tail ends of the bell curve, either for high neuroticism or possibly overly stable. In any direction you go away from the middle of the bell curve, you're very likely to wind up with significant distortions in your information processing in terms of your ability to evaluate, what this information means and how it should be calibrated in an overall scheme of running an ideal cost-benefit analysis for your life. So it's most obvious in someone who's emotionally unstable. we can see that they, quote, or overreact. But it's also the case that people that were extremely stable can underreact. It's less obvious when that's happening. But the same thing can be happening. In other words, a person can be essentially have some vulnerability that they're not reacting to, and they're not taking essentially protective actions because they're too relaxed about it, and they're not understanding that there's an emergency. So any variety of personality characteristics that are substantially different than the mean, with the exception of IQ, are likely to be vulnerable to certain environmental contexts, certain contexts that can prey upon that particular distortion and wind up causing trouble. So I don't think we would say it knocks off a certain amount of IQ points. I mean, you could potentially find a situation that you could, in theory, probably pull data on such a thing and get some kind of gross estimate, but it wouldn't really mean too much, other than you would demonstrate the phenomenon that we know is there. We know that someone could be, for example, exceptionally bright but very volatile emotionally and make really bad decisions. And we could look at their lives and say, wow, that's amazing that person made that bunch of decisions when in fact they're super intelligent. But the personality essentially got in the way. And that, I don't think that we can say, it's not the same interesting and curious phenomenon that goes on when people have a bunch of money trouble and you can actually measure an IQ change in their performance on a test. That's fascinating to me. So that's a little bit that's being overwhelmingly distracted by financial issues. So that's a different kind of phenomenon. This is more an issue where, depending upon what the circumstances are coming at the individual, if they have an unusual personality, that personality could be vulnerable to them being sucked into making poor decisions. Poor decisions then their IQ cohort, people similar to them with similar IQs but not unusual personalities, those people would be far less likely to make those mistakes. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes a lot more sense. And I kind of realized as you were explaining is that I'm asking about one particular variable in the entire scheme of, adding these variables together. So it's like me asking you about, biochemistry, but asking one specific reaction. You're like, well, there's this whole biochemical explanation here. Right. Yeah. And so that makes a lot more sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The flip side of that, just to add a little bit of that, is to, it's Dr. Lisle's talking about the IQ cohort being more likely to make mistakes. I would also say that for the personality cohort, high IQ is protective.
Yes.
So for the personality cohort of the same distorted, crazy personality problem, the higher IQ you have, and this is again implied in everything you just said, but just to make it really clear, if you do have higher IQ, that's mediating the effect of the distortion to some degree, just because you're a better information processor overall. So the fact that I have a higher than average IQ is probably what kept me alive despite my 95th percentile openness during my ill-spent youth. My openness got me into all kinds of bad situations, but I was able to more accurately assess all of the different pieces of information coming in. Other aspects of personality will also interact with particular distortions that you have. So in my case, my high conscientiousness helped out with that as well. So all of these things, you don't want to be too deterministic with any type of particular personality distortion, even though it can definitely get you into some trouble. But you are a dynamic being depending on your IQ, your other personality descriptions, and of course the broader environmental context that you're finding yourself in.
Yeah.
Right. No, that makes a lot of sense, and appreciate that, because it sounds like it's not like we have IQ points, and then you get a few points off because of the instability, and then you
Right.
add some more points because of the conscientiousness, and then you get a few more because of the agreeable. You know what I mean? Like it's kind of like in our line of work with the food and lifestyle. It's not like you add potatoes and then you subtract it by French fries, then you add some with fruits, and then
Yes. If you think about it, right? If you got any sort of math background, this is vector analysis all the way. So this is just a situation comes up, and there are several forces that can be acting in concert or as opponent processes, and in some kind of multi-dimensional space. And the behavior that you see is the result of the vector analysis of the entire personality interacting with the entire situation. So that's what it is. And the entire situation is not just the situation you see, it's also filtering its way in that individual through their memory circuits. So it's not just what they see, hear, and taste, it's also all of their memories. So now you start to see what behavior really is. The behavior that you see is the consequences of computations that are environmental inputs, sensory inputs, through five senses, being filtered through two additional filters, one of which is the person's previous experience, which is what behavioral psychology and essentially what psychology was in the 20th century believed was everything. So they believed that was the filter, that the person's learning history, what they had been reinforced for or punished for, or observed others being reinforced for, or observed others being punished for. In other words, through their learning, quote, the laws of learning, they believed that was the filter, that new circumstances were filtered through, and then that caused the computations that would lead to behavior. That was a big mistake. That was a catastrophic error that has now been corrected by behavior genetics. So now we understand, and evolutionary psychology more broadly, so now we understand that no, what behavior is, it's the result of sensory data interacting with both the personality, which is an innate structure, in other words, the individual differences in those brains, along with their learning history. So now we have all the variables accounted for. And that's a very complex set of vectors pushing and pulling against a given behavioral impulse, and that's what it is that you're seeing. All right, well, let's roll on.
Okay, so our next question. So we, Dr. Hawk, we talked about this last show, a previous show, where the question was that Dr. Lisle has mentioned the concept of internal ugliness a couple of times in previous shows. How does one go about identifying their own internal ugliness and then mitigating or correcting it? Now, with this question, Dr. Hawk and I couldn't remember when you had said internal ugliness. It's just not something we remembered. But we figured we'd ask you, Dr. Lisle, and get your take on this.
Well, I deal with my own internal ugliness by looking in the mirror and try and think about when I need to color my hair. No, I don't have the faintest recall of using that phrase. So perhaps I did, but I probably was doing so in a diatribe about some disgusting human and describing them as having internal ugliness. So all I mean by that is personality characteristics that I find undesirable. So that's all I mean by that. So that tends to be low conscientiousness, low disagreeable and low conscientious are my two primary candidates. I don't have anything against extroverts. I don't have anything against people that are more unstable and therefore sort of more passionate individuals. But if you show me a disagreeable, low conscientious, then you can better believe I'm not going to like that person. I would consider them internally ugly. And if you are such an individual, there's really nothing you can do about it. Go find some people that think that that's attractive. Yeah.
The good news is that there are probably not too many, if any, of those people listening to this show. So
right.
that's good.
That's right.
Yeah, they would. Yeah, they wouldn't be able to stand more than a few minutes listening to the.
No, because if they're disagreeable, they would have to be high in conscientiousness to want to do something about their disagreeableness, which would make them listen, which rules them out. And if they're if they're not disagreeable, then they're not a candidate anyway. So I think we're fine.
Yeah, we're good. Next.
Wonderful. Thank you for clarifying.
Yeah.
All right. Our next question. Dear doctors, what are the uses and limits of trying to create habits? For example, I often try to establish patterns of doing the dishes before bed, going to bed early, showering early during the day, cleaning regularly, and the like. But it inevitably falls apart like someone coming off a diet. In what areas or situations is it worth bothering, and how do I keep on track? How do I alter my cost benefit or CB and make my conscious priorities into my nervous system's priorities too?
Yeah, I can tackle this one. This is a really common question. People are really kind of misguided and misdirected by a lot of the information out there. It's like, 14 days to create a new habit, and if you just do the same thing, and you can turn your life around, and you can change all of these behaviors. Where habits are equilibria that are emerging from your personality and your cost benefit analysis on the problem. So and to some degree the environment that you've created to be around the problem. So we most often, Dr. Lisle and I are dealing with people who are trying to change their diet, they're trying to get healthier, and this is an incredibly common question that comes up in that context, because people think if they could just change their habits, they could just, have a salad for dinner every night, or have oatmeal for breakfast, or get to the gym, or whatever it is that's a so-called healthy habit, then they would vastly improve their lives. And they're led by the entire psychodynamic military-industrial complex to believe that this is an easy process, and that you just need to decide, and just 10 days, 14 days, 100 days, whatever it is. But you're at the mercy to some degree with any habit of personality limitations, as we've talked about a lot on the last show, and we've touched on this show. It always begins with your personality limitations. So if you don't have a fair degree of conscientiousness in your personality and in the genetic code of your personality, you're really going to be struggling with any kind of habit development, especially something that is outside of your comfort zone, something that is turning your life in a different sort of direction. So that's the first big limitation on that. And the second is the cost benefit analysis. So if it's a high cost to your life in whatever way, either it's taking more time and energy, or it's taking you away from other ways that you would prefer to be spending that time and energy, you're just not going to have the motivation to be making any kind of major changes in your day-to-day life for any kind of sustainable period of time. Or if there's not some big perceived benefit, it's all going to come down to the little computer in your head that is going to produce the correct result for what the most optimal cost benefit is at any given time. So let's say you've got the personality, you've got enough conscientiousness. Let's just for an example, you want to go for a walk before work every morning. This is a habit that you want to create. So you've got a personality that has enough conscientiousness in it to actually apply yourself to create this habit, and you've looked at the situation and you perceive that there's enough benefit that's going to motivate you to do this. So you're going to get outside before the hustle and bustle of the day starts. You can take the dog for a walk. You're really going to enjoy it. You're going to feel good. You might lose some weight, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And the cost is perceived as fairly low. So it seems like everything is in place, but then you're dealing with the problem of the environment. So if you do not set things up for yourself optimally to make this as easy as possible, you're also not going to be able to execute on any given habit in any kind of ongoing way. So that may mean that you lay out your clothes to go walking in the morning, the night before you go to bed. So you've got your shoes, you've got the dog leash, you've got everything set up. You're just trying to lower the cost at every single interval. So these are all the things that you have to do to even have any kind of chance of so-called, developing a new habit. And these are things that are very, very difficult to create and sustain over time unless you have a major, major change in the informational matrix that is going to change the overall cost-benefit analysis on the problem. So if you just had a heart attack and you have all of this new information that is coming into the system about what kind of trouble you're in, and the fact that you need to lose 30 pounds or you're going to be at high risk for another heart attack, that is new information that can change the cost-benefit analysis, which makes it more likely that all of those things that you put in place will be more successful than they would have been before you had that additional information. So this is how these things are all interacting. Is it's personality, it's cost-benefit analysis, which is really just the aggregate of all of the information that is in the system, and it's the environmental situation that you have set up to support the development of that new habit. I would also just really briefly add that information in this case can also take the form of the self-esteem process that we've talked about a lot on the show. So if you are trying to develop a new habit, you have the conscientiousness, you have high motivation to do it, you've set up the environment appropriately. The last piece of the puzzle is that as you go into this and you are diligently applying yourself and you are maybe not making any visible progress to anybody else, but you are impressing your own internal audience with your diligence, that counts as new information in the cost-benefit analysis that makes the overall venture more worthwhile. So you actually start to plug that into the benefit side of the equation. And so it becomes its own autocatalytic process where you are chasing the self-esteem of the pride of doing a very good job of developing a new habit. So if all of those things are lined up and in sync and ready to go, then you've got a fighting chance at creating a new habit. And if any one of those things is missing, then the combination lock is off and it's never going to happen and you're at the mercy of your personality and the environment. So that would be my rant on habits.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's fabulous.
Dr. Hawk, feel free to rant anytime.
Yeah. Let me give just a little bit more. It's the same information, but maybe just slightly different words in some spots. What ultimately, as Jen's saying, this is information processing is changing, and so what fires the first move towards a new habit is a speculation. So it's a speculation that our previous CB may be wrong. So a person that is sufficiently open to the possibility that it could be that they are behaving suboptimally and that it could be that a different pattern of behavior may result in a more profitable CB, i.e. a better existence. So it's a gamble. It's like a penny stock. We're going to put a little bit of money in it and see what happens. And what typically will happen is people will put a little bit of money in and they find out it didn't do anything. So the grand plan crashes after a week. That's because they didn't see the result that they thought they were going to see. Now, once in a while, they may start to see results. So that penny stock actually was a legitimate company and it starts making money. So the behavioral change starts to result in payoffs, and as Jen's talking about, the self-esteem mechanism could be a major part of the payoff, which I'd forgotten about, and but there could be other payoffs as well. So a person that has had cramps and constipation their whole life, starts to eat a bowl of oatmeal in the morning and things are different and they're out of that pain and now they're having painless bowel movements for the first time in 30 years. And so now it's like, oh, well, in that case, I'm going to, quote, change my habit. Okay. So what Jen and I would both rant about equally is the fantasy out there in the world of pop psychology and elsewhere that you can, quote, program your brain into doing things in a good, positive, better way, with psychocybernetics, Tony Robbins, or some other thing. No, you can't. Your brain is not that stupid. It's an extraordinarily sophisticated CB machine. And if you haven't been doing this big thing before, you're probably not going to do it now because your brain has run the CB. It's already probably run many little tests in that direction. And it felt like at the end of the data said, no, I don't think it's worth it. So, and as Jen was saying, it's all being run through personality matrices that are giving the person internal feedback, telling them, was it worth it or not? And so, there's nothing wrong with having a personality that doesn't feel like jogging 2 miles a day. Nothing in the world wrong with that. That's a given personality that goes out there and jogs around the block, and after a quarter of a mile says, "No, I don't like it. It's not worth it." That doesn't make you a bad person. That just means that you're a person that's not going to become a habit. So a moderate investment may alter the CB. As a result of a number of ways. We may feel a lot better, or we may have a self-esteem mechanism that gets activated. It's also extremely likely that whatever benefits we see doesn't feel like it's worth the cost. So we went on a diet for 2 weeks and we didn't lose 22 pounds, so we're like, forget it, I'm not doing it. So the lasting changes that quote become new habits are just CBs. Cost-benefit analyses that have reached a different equilibrium because the person has new information, and that becomes the CB. It's not because of a habit. Now, there's one last aspect to this that people are fascinated with, and it feels very compelling, and that's that repetition is the mother of skill, and skill is the reduction of error. So as you learn how to chop up a pot of vegetables and put them in a steamer and make them, you've now reduced the cost of creating a nice plate of steamed vegetables from the first time that you did it. Okay? So that's why being open to trying something out a little while until you develop a little bit of skill is a worthwhile thing to explore. Okay? So that's worth it. But most of the skills are involved. You don't need to become some master chef or anything else under the sun in order to get the cost down. Learning curves are, particularly, the human mind is very adept at a few repetitions getting an awful lot better. I've seen people get much better at some motor move literally in 10 repetitions. You can become far better. So it doesn't take a lot for an individual, a little bit of gumption to try a new pattern of behavior. And now the costs of executing that behavior are reduced as a result of a little bit of skill. And now they get to sit back and look at whether the payoff is worth it. Most of the time it isn't. Okay, so most of the time the kinds of things that people are wanting to change are embedded in a very complicated bunch of vector processes that their life has pretty much reached the equilibrium that it has based on the nature of their identity. Sometimes people do change, and sometimes they change in interesting and productive ways. Usually, but when that happens, it wasn't quote because of a habit. It was because of a list of essentially inputs to the system that Dr. Hawk and I are explaining.
Yeah, that skill development piece is. Oh, were you? Don't want to interrupt.
No, yeah,
I was
go
just
ahead.
Going to riff on that. It's just that's super critical. That ability to develop the comfort with something new that might have very high value, and to reduce the error, and then to change the CB long term. But that's exactly that. That's the sort of the dead zone where personality hits its limitations, particularly conscientiousness, because you have to sort of grit your way through with conscientiousness and to some degree IQ, that really uncomfortable space between the new habits still being really uncomfortable and therefore high cost and full of error, and 4 iterations later when you're much more comfortable chopping the vegetables and making the soup, and suddenly this is a really good idea that doesn't take that much effort. But people quit after 2 or 3, they don't get to 4 or 5 because they don't have the conscientiousness to push through. So that's why personality is so critical, and why if you do have IQ, going back to the earlier question, and you have the information about how you could change it, you've read the books, you know about the what you want to be doing as far as diet and lifestyle, all of those different informational processes are really important, and you just have to get through that really uncomfortable space. But that's a big limitation for people.
Yeah, here's another thing that changes people's lives, and this Jen alluded to this, and that is that this is what I call structural change. So this is where the environment changes, not you. So you don't develop the skill. We just flat out change the environment. So a number of people over the years when I've counseled people on diet and lifestyle issues have changed their lives because they hired a cook. So they're in a 2-income, high-income household, and the last thing they need to do is struggle home from their big shot jobs and then chop vegetables when they could pay somebody $15 an hour to do that. And so so we make a structural change in the person's environment where healthy, tasty food is already available, and all they had to do is walk through the door and take out a fork. So that we've changed the CB on healthy eating. For other people that need to make, that just need to sometimes make some kind of healthy change that could make a big difference in their lives. Sometimes people believe that they have to make sweeping, cinemascope changes in their diet and lifestyle in order to get major benefits. That's not true. You just have to, a lot of times, just make some changes and it could save your life. And the difference between terrible and okay, isn't that hard to impact, but you get most of the benefit from just giving the body a break. And so I had a woman that was 5'4" and 338 pounds. And I could not get her to make any changes because she was conceptualizing it, no matter how I worked at this, as all or nothing. And one day I finally said, look, just oatmeal in the morning, just try it for a little while. Well, I said, put Count Chocula in it. I don't care what you do. She just was eating a terrible diet. And I don't know whether it was 6 months or a year later, but she was down to 260. So that single change over time, I think it was about a year later, had resulted in 80 pounds of weight loss. Nothing else had changed. Oh. Okay, in her diet.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm going to put Count Chocula in my oatmeal now too.
Yeah, excellent idea.
So yeah, sometimes one change. The reason why people sometimes don't make the one change is they feel like, well, I have to make all kinds of changes. And it's like, no, you don't. This is what I call one pot of soup. You don't have to become a vegan chef. You don't even have to become a vegan. But if you're eating crap all the time, if you make one pot of soup a week and you'll eat, 5 or 6 or 8 bowls of that soup over the week, that's huge for some people. It can replace a lot of very rich food that they're eating and result in a new equilibrium for their health. So this is, again, and what changed there is not just what it is that they did. So we didn't have to have a big bunch of habits where we're going to make this spectacular change. We change one thing, and that one thing results in a new equilibrium that's really worth it to the person. And it wasn't worth it because they may have had a mistaken belief about what they had to do to get the benefit. And it turns out, no, you can get most of the benefit from just doing this half-assed. That's going to happen with so many things around health. The difference, a big part of the difference is just get it half right, and you will get a great deal of health benefit if you're coming from a really bad place when it comes to bad behavior, destructive behavior. All right, enough already. What else do we got, Nathan?
That's wonderful. Well, I was just thinking, so this question is asking, how do I alter the CB and make conscious priorities? Mm-hmm. I guess the only thing I can think of from what you guys are saying is they really can't, other than maybe invite someone they really care about impressing over every day so they know they have to clean everything.
Yeah, that's structural change.
Yes, it's structural
that's
change.
That's one way to
there
do it. Yeah. I mean, there's all kinds of creative ways that you can solve problems once you start thinking that way, and that is a legitimate alternative.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yep. Mm-hmm. All good.
Well, all right. Okay, our next question. This question is 2 questions for the doctors. Dear doctors, my husband had an affair last year, but we are slowly working through things ourselves and taking steps to save our marriage for our children. First question is, how can I get over the feelings of inadequacy that I have in my marriage post-affair? It's been almost a year since I found out, and I still bring it up in arguments. At times, I use it as my trump card, and I win our arguments as he feels bad every time I bring it up. Yet, I can't bring myself to stop doing it? The second question is, how can I let go of the jealousy and resentment towards his affair partner? They are still in contact and remain friends, but I find myself checking her social media accounts and obsessing over her, and I want to stop.
Well, that's a boatload of issues. Okay, so I'm not laughing at the person. I'm just saying that's a lot of questions to ask, and thank you for having the courage to write those questions to us and have us even talk about this. So I don't think I want to break down everything here. There's too many moving parts and too many different issues on the table. But let's talk about. And Jen, please feel free to help me here, because I'm going to forget parts of the whole thing, and then you're gonna say, "Oh yeah," you're gonna fill in the blanks.
Sure.
First of all, the first thing I hear is we've decided we're going to save our marriage for the sake of the kids. That's a terrible idea. Okay, so right away we have a bad idea. So we've got a mistake in understanding about how to optimize our happiness right from the jump. So the only reason to stay married is financial desperation, and that you want to be there. Okay, that you love the person and you don't want to live without them. Those are two good reasons to stay married. If you are not financially desperate and you don't want to be with the person, or they don't want to be with you, which amounts to fundamentally the same thing in the end. If that's what the situation is, for God's sake, don't stay together for the sake of the children, because you're not doing the children any good. So that's the first thing that I would have to say about this. Now, undoubtedly there's going to be a lot of people that are uncomfortable with this, but Dr. Laura Schlesinger would probably have a heart attack or a stroke if she heard this. Okay, because Dr. Laura thinks that everything's about the children, and every little thing that you do to the children that's a bad thing for the children, and that's a terrible thing, and that the moral high ground for all life is to do everything right for the children, so that the children aren't damaged in their developmental process. She's not alone. Dr. Laura, who I think has a doctorate in chemistry, she never learned anything about psychology, but had she ever learned anything about psychology, she would have learned it wrong. She would have been right at the doorstep of the psychodynamic and developmental learning theory, thinking that early childhood processes and childhood processes are bending and shaping the individual personality. It's a very reasonable belief, but it turns out to be entirely false. So the notion that your children are going to be damaged by a divorce process is false. It's not true. Okay, so the fact is that they may squawk and be very uncomfortable if you go through a divorce process. They could be uncomfortable, but they're not going to be damaged by this. So that's where I begin my discussion. So I begin my discussion with, that is a lousy reason to stay married. So now we're going to go a little further, that this person has these feelings of inadequacy. Well, obviously, those feelings are probably being fueled by ongoing esteem signaling that are coming from the husband. So I doubt that the person would be feeling, quote, inadequate. Inadequate for what? Inadequate to compete as a sexual target for the husband's interests. That's what the inadequacy means. So that means we can just feel like we can translate this into, I'm not qualified. My husband is giving me consistent evidence through his behavior that I don't qualify. Okay? So how do I get rid of the feelings that come from my husband giving me consistent evidence that I don't qualify? Answer, you don't get rid of those feelings. Okay? The only thing that could change those feelings is if you qualified. Then you would feel differently. Okay? Or that you are out of the relationship and therefore you are not in an intimate psychological signaling matrix where you are attempting to get positive feedback and being refused. Okay? So that is that story as far as that goes. So I guess all that you can do is you could do everything that in your power in order to try to figure out how to make yourself more appealing, and then to find out whether or not he changes his feelings towards you and therefore gives you evidence that you qualify. That's not going to happen by when you argue, using his affair as a trump card. You should be using his affair as evidence that you didn't qualify. Now, that won't always be the case. Someone could qualify and someone could still have an affair. But I don't suspect that that's what's happening in this particular case. I think in this case, the evidence that I'm getting from the few sentences that are written here is that this woman is getting evidence that she doesn't qualify. They're sticking together because they've got a misguided notion that this is good for the kids, or there's financial considerations, and I'm not minimizing those. Those can be very important considerations. The children's feelings can also be considerations, and they would have merit in terms of the weighing of the decision. But if you are, why would I say so? Well, they're people, and they would have feelings, and they would go through some unpleasant processes if you were to get a divorce. And so, it depends upon how old they are and what's at stake in your life and how old you are and what you want out of your life, and whether or not the husband and wife can just remain kind of good friends, and whether or not the wife can not care, really could care less whether or not she gets positive steam signals from the husband about her attractiveness, and whether or not he sneaks around and has some affairs on the side that she doesn't know about. Like, hey, you could be good friends and have, quote, marriage, so we stay together and it's easier on the kids and they don't know what's going on. That's all cool. If that's how people want to do things, I have no problem with that. If that's the decision that a pair of people decide. But in this case, that's not what's going on. The woman is highly sensitive to the signals that she is receiving because it would appear that the husband qualifies and she does not qualify. Now, can you change things about yourself that would increase the statistical likelihood of you qualifying? I would ask some other questions that would be important in this for this relationship. Did you ever qualify? Okay, sometimes you never qualified, even though you got married and you got pregnant and you had kids. You didn't really ever qualify, and sometimes people know that. They are aware what the tone of the relationship was. If he has always had a wandering eye and he was never that into you, and it was that way really after 12 months together, and you got married anyway, then you really didn't qualify, at least not for a very long period of time, and now you don't qualify now. Okay? If it turns out that that isn't the case, that you qualified for 10 years, and then some things changed, whatever it changed, your appearance changed, you got a big raise, or just life happens and we drifted apart, then in that case, it may be impossible to qualify at this point. However, it might be possible. So is there anything about yourself that you could make yourself a more attractive partner on any number of dimensions that would cause you to qualify? Maybe. So you'd have to have a long look at that and see where it is that who you are how have you changed and in what ways, and can you do anything about it?
Well, I think she's already in that process. That's why she's obsessing over the social media accounts of the chippy. She's stalking the chippy comparatively to see what does the chippy have that she doesn't have. So right. she's already in that process. But whether that's coming from a place of genuinely wanting to qualify for the partner, or whether it's sort of like a panic about losing the relationship for provisional protection reasons, I would advise her to get very much in touch with her true feelings about that. Like, is she still in love with him? Does she still truly want to be with him? Does he still qualify for her? Or is it really we're just trying to save the marriage for the children, quote unquote, and she feels the impending huge status loss of the divorce and losing the relationship, and so she's trying to qualify to to win, not because she truly is in love with him. So those are important traps that women can get themselves into in this kind of situation, and that drives the comparative frenzy with what this other woman has that she doesn't have. And the only way out of that is to engage in some really deep self-reflection about what your actual feelings toward this individual are, and if you really truly want to be with them.
Yeah. I would think. Good. That's great, Jen. I would say in terms of the comparing and looking and tracking the female, shut it off.
Yeah.
I'd shut off the whole thing.
Easier said than done for the female nervous
disable
system.
your Facebook.
Yeah, that's structurally you have to disable your Facebook. You're going, as long as you have access to social media, you're going to be stalking this person. So disable Facebook, block her account, do everything you can to protect yourself from that information, for sure.
Let's remember, in 2004, I don't know when Facebook was created.
Around that
when
time,
was
2005, I think. Yeah.
2004, there was no Facebook, and you were just fine. Okay? So that we're not going to die of a Facebook deficiency. So your life right now, Facebook's not going anywhere. Okay? So guess what? If you shut off Facebook for the next 6 months, just shut it off. No Facebook at all. Beat Your Genes Facebook, nothing. Just get rid of it all. You don't need to see what other people are posting and what it is that they're saying. You could just kiss it off.
Yeah.
Okay?
Just quit smoking those cigarettes.
6
just
months from now.
Just set it down. Just don't do it.
Yeah, just get rid of it. You could do a structural process that gets you out of that thing, okay? Then if you do that for, 30 days, you start to be able, this is just like a quote new habit, right? We get to see for long enough what the CB really is on the other side of this. And it's going to turn out that there's going to be a more peace of mind without it.
Yeah. And
okay, so that's why I would have
more
you do
peace
that.
of mind and more attunement
ahead,
to your own feelings, going back to what I was saying before, because right now your CB is being driven by this comparative frenzy, by constant information, looking at her, looking to see what she's up to. You're artificially inflating the importance of this battle that you're in your mind with her, regardless of your actual desire for the relationship. So if you shut down that input, then that forces you into a direct confrontation with your relationship with your husband as it stands, separate from your perception of who she is and what she represents. So that's an important piece of that process.
Yeah,
now,
excellent.
Dr. Hawk, I have a question for you, Dr. Hawk, and I'm not trying to be argumentative, so if it comes across that way, that's not my intention, which is, you mentioned how this lady is, how she is, she's that she may get caught into competing against this woman for her husband. And so the first thing that came to my mind isn't that the whole point, is that this is a competition, and if she starts becoming more competitive and therefore is more likely to win, she will feel better as a result and maybe even happier. I might be missing something there, but that was what I was thinking.
Yeah, I just don't want her chasing the false esteem of winning the game for his so-called affection if she doesn't qualify and never qualified, or if he doesn't qualify, especially post-affair, but maybe he never did either. So I just don't want her blinded by the esteem hunting that she is in with the context of this, the status that's associated with the marriage qua marriage, rather than whether this is actually a set of emotional dynamics with this human being that she is happy and content with and wants to continue in her life and wants to somehow, recover everything that's good about that relationship. I'm not getting a lot of that in the question, which is why I'm sort of driving in that direction, because the question is, to me, implying that, we're staying together for the kids, there's big status loss associated with the loss of this marriage. We don't want that to happen. So how can I, game the system? Not, oh my God, I feel like I'm on the brink of losing this human that I care profoundly about, and my heart is breaking over it, and what can I do? That's a different kind of set of circumstances. And if that's the position that she's really in, we would some of this advice about, well, maybe you do want to be thinking about how you could qualify and confronting all of that head on. But it seems like we just don't want to be in a situation where we're competing for the sake of competition.
Got it. Okay. No, that makes a lot more sense, because I guess I'm understanding a little bit more than what I learned with my sisters growing up. Not that they didn't educate me, but I just wasn't paying attention. But so you're saying that women will they may be competing for the same guy just to win the competition rather than to actually find happiness, and that is a
right.
that they would have to beat their genes in order for not to do that and to consciously
and I don't think that's a gender specific
yes, I would agree.
trap.
Right.
I think everybody can fall into that trap because of what the relationship looks like to the outside world and what the just
trap.
kind of all and I think different people are susceptible to it behind different personality characteristics, but it is something that women, I have noticed, get themselves into just because of the ancestral demand for provision and protection that is getting dinged with this whole process too. So that's, especially if she is in a position of weakness as far as her finances go, and if these kids are pretty little and she's looking at being a single parent, like all of these different things are going to play into the whole process.
Now, from a practical...
But overall,
Oh, sorry, go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt.
Oh, no, go ahead. I was just at the end of my rant.
From a practical purpose, let's suppose she fell victim to this and was actually starting to compete just to win the competition, and not actually, taking care of what she actually wanted, or, would she be, I guess I'm thinking is wouldn't that still be good for her psychology anyway, because she would be becoming more competitive and she'd maybe get in better shape, or, find a hobby or something competitive. And so she wouldn't be left worse as a result.
I think that what we're trying to get at here is the following: that this person is suffering, and what we're attempting to do is to try to shed light on what are the most effective moves to reduce the suffering. And so there's a number of moves that you could make, but what we're trying to do is to get to the heart of the best strategy. And the best strategy, that's why I ranted for quite a bit on really sentence number one. We're staying together. We decided to stay together for the sake of the kids. Bam. Right away, you just lit off an atomic bomb in my head. Okay? Mm-hmm. And so we already are in deep trouble in terms of the optimal strategy for optimizing human happiness. Okay? So that's why what Jen is talking about is, of course, Nathan, you can make some moves in a social media haywire world where you are sort of amplifying the cost of losing in a romantic game. You've effectively become your own celebrity. You can imagine Hollywood, relationships and the status losses associated with who dumped who in a breakup, and how nasty those things can get as a result of the accusations in the tabloids about who really qualified and who didn't qualify, and who said and who did what, and what the promises were and how they really behaved. Okay, I'm surprised that we don't have tabloids saying, well, the reason why we actually broke up is that he had a small penis and nobody knows it. Okay. But, I put up with it for a while, but, that's why it broke up. It didn't break up because he slept with somebody else. No. No, I had already broken up with him because he has a small penis. That's what, I'm surprised I haven't heard that. But the point is that the status seeking and defenses that are natural to human beings in the breakup of a pair bond, these are expensive processes. And this woman is probably feeling the weight of that. Like, ooh, this is bad, okay? If I've been rejected, if I have been fallen short, if an interloper has outcompeted me, then it drops my mate value in the village. And so I've got to be all freaked out about this, okay? Because I got Stone Age brain on red alert saying, oh my God, what does she look like? How can I compete? How can I keep this thing together long enough so that the world and our family and all of our friends sort of half-ass forget about this affair? And then if this thing comes apart 5 or 6 years from now, it'll be on my terms when I reject him, okay? That way I maintain my mate status. Any kind of strategies, and believe me, I've seen those strategies run. Those are bad strategies. So even though good things could come of it, i.e. get in shape, look better, get some new clothes, new hairdo, more makeup, whatever the hell, okay? We could put a pretty face on it, but really at the ultimate, where the rubber hits the road in human happiness, we want to flush all that. Because the status losses associated with breakups and pair bonds are temporary, okay? They may hurt. They're an ancillary loss that a person may temporarily go through in the Stone Age. Like, ooh, why did Susie break up with you? Okay? And then there's some questioning in people in the village as to a person's real mate value. Maybe we need to discount them 10% because they went through a breakup and we don't know why, but we know that they're the rejectee. Okay? So as a result, those losses are temporary, and they don't even exist in the modern environment because the new people you meet don't know anything about it. Okay? So we're responding to phantom threats to esteem. And as a result, what Jen and I want to do is be like a laser and hone in on the most important thing. And the first thing that comes to my mind is don't stay married for the kids unless there's some awfully important ancillary reasons why you would do that. And the second thing, and a related thing that Jen is honing in on, is don't compete for this guy just to be competing for the guy. That's a big mistake. That's a total waste of your life. Okay? You need to get in touch with, wait a minute, is this, can I legitimately compete with him? Have I ever qualified for him? Does he qualify for me? And is there a hell of a lot of happiness in this relationship's future that what is required is for us to get past some obstacles and some conflicts of interest between us? If that's true, fine. Then it makes complete sense to stew over these things and to work and try to get some expert assistance if you can find it, and work through some of the conflicts. But it shouldn't be overly hard, folks, because a great romance is not overly hard.